Let's get going with our evening with Tasha Alexander and Andrew Grant, who are waiting patiently. I'm going to do a brief introduction, but they're going to fill in the details. Let me just tell you a little bit about them, starting alphabetically with Tasha. You all know, she is the writer of the wonderful Lady Emily historical mystery series. She studied English literature and medieval history at the University of Notre Dame. And she says she was convinced at a very early age that she was born in the wrong century. She's published her first Lady Emily book 16 years ago. And she's now, number 15 just came out, The Dark Heart of Florence. And she's got number 16 coming out next year, Secrets of the Nile. Andrew Grant has written 9 thrillers, including the series about Detective Cooper Devereaux and Pomograph Janitor. That is the one that I read. I read the first one, Invisible. I loved it, Andrew. I never would have known about it. I love it. I highly recommend it. He was born in Birmingham, England, and he studied drama and English literature at the University of Sheffield. He founded a theater company that produced original material. I'm excited to hear about that. He also worked in the telecommunications industry for many years before leaving to become a novelist. His latest book, or at least I think his latest book, is written with his brother. It's number 25 in the Jack Reacher series. You've probably heard of that. The Sentinel is the new book, co-written with his brother, Lee Child. I'm going to let him explain this intriguing development in his life and talk about what that means to him. The most fun thing, I think, to a lot of us is these two are married. They met in 2008 at a mystery writers conference. I think I have that right. They can correct me, in Baltimore. And they married in 2010. I think you guys just had your anniversary. Congratulations.
We did.
11 years. And right now, if I have this right, they're living on or near a nature preserve in Wyoming, which is another intriguing thing that we need to hear about. But you know, I just have to start. I don't want to bury the lead, because to a lot of us, your romantic story is very interesting. The fact that you're two amazing writers, solid writers, best-selling authors, and you found each other and married, and now you haven't mixed your careers, but you're writing, we're just very curious. Can you tell us a little bit, give us the romantic scoop, and maybe talk about what is it like being writers together? How do you make that work?
Well, you know what, just to get it out of the way, it's fabulous. It's the greatest thing ever. When we met, VoucherCon is this giant mystery convention that gets held every year, and it's in a different city. And in 2008, it was in Baltimore. And I had been persuaded by a bunch of my friends to come a night early. So I got there on October 8th, 2008, and I was sitting in the bar. Not that I pay attention, not that I remember that date.
I love it.
I was sitting in the bar with my friends, because at a mystery conference, everyone tends to congregate in the bar. Yes. And I looked over, we were sitting at a table, and I looked over and I saw this tall, cool drink of water standing at the bar by himself. And I thought he was adorable. So I just went over to him and said hello and introduced myself. And then he talked, and I thought, and he's got an English accent. This just keeps getting better. And really, we stayed up until like 5:30 in the morning, sitting in the hotel lobby talking, and the rest is history, really. Now, his view is a little different than mine, because his position is that when I saw him and came over to talk to him, it was because I saw that he was alone and felt sorry for him. And
Andrew,
before I let him tell his side, I would just like to go on record and say that single girls in bars usually don't go around trying to make sure lonely men are happy.
Well, that's a fair point. But yeah, my memory is a little bit different, because I also arrived in Baltimore on October the 8th. It was the first of any of these book events that I had ever done, because my first book hadn't come out yet. It was scheduled to come out in May 2009. So people had said to me, okay, now is the time, you've got to start going to these events, you've got to start meeting people, meeting the reviewers and the booksellers and other publishing people. So you've got to go and you've got to introduce yourself and start getting your name out there. So I wasn't really too happy about this. I don't like doing things like that. And so my brother was living in New York at the time, so I was still living in England. So I flew over, stayed a couple of nights with him, and then we drove from New York up to, or down, or whichever way it is, to Baltimore. And we went to dinner. There was one of those steak houses in the hotel, with some celebrity's name on it. I can't remember whose now. But we had dinner. Then we came out, and my brother wanted to go outside for a cigarette. And I really wanted to go with him, but I don't smoke, so there's not all that much point in doing that. And I knew that it was just putting off the inevitable. I knew I had to go into the bar and start talking to strangers. And I thought, there's no point in putting it off. I've just got to bite the bullet and do it. So I walked to the door of the bar, and I remember looking in, and it was this giant room, this big rectangular room with a bar down one side, round tables in the middle, and booths at the other side. And it was crammed with people. So I thought, well, if I just push my way to the far end, then even if I lose my nerve and I want to leave, at least I'll be bumping into people and having to say, excuse me, or whatever. So, I'll be forced to talk to people one way or another. So I took one step into the bar, and I saw this unbelievably beautiful woman standing at one of these round tables with some friends. And I thought, okay, the plan has changed. But I thought, what am I going to do? I'm not going to just walk up to her and start talking to her. So I thought, well, I'm in a bar and I haven't got a drink, so I'll go and order one. And by the time it arrives, maybe I'll have thought of something. So I went to the bar, and normally if you're thirsty, it takes half an hour for your drink to come, or at least it seems that way. But I thought, the longer it takes, the better, because it will give me time to think of something. But of course, the beer was there like that. I had no time to think about anything. I was thinking, this is terrible. And I looked around, and she was walking over towards me. So we started talking, and we haven't stopped talking since.
And his brother likes to call that cigarette the camel that changed the world, because he went outside to smoke, and if he hadn't done that, then we might have never met.
Right.
Yeah, the whole evening would have unfolded differently.
So he gets a lot of the credit then, clearly.
He does, although, and I've given him a hard time about this, because I met him actually before my first book came out, a few months before it came out. And so I'd known him for years, and he never told me he had this hot younger brother. I mean,
Yeah, he might have a different perspective on that.
Well, it was actually very funny, because after we've been talking for probably like an hour or so, Lee came into the bar, and, as I said, I knew him, and he came over and he gave me a hug, and he said, so I see you've met my brother. And I just thought, what is he talking about? What is he? And then I looked at one and the other, and they're both, I was like, I have no idea. Yes, I have met your brother. Thank God.
You know what? That story is so romantic, and it shows a lot about your different personalities too. And Tasha just going for it, and Andrew, you would have gotten there, right? But you just needed a little time to figure out the situation.
I would have done it. Yeah, I would have needed a little bit more time to get my nerve up, I think. But I like to think I'd have got there in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But it's hard if you're English and you haven't been properly introduced.
Oh, and Andrew didn't know anybody there except that guy out, smoking the camel. So
exactly.
It was really brave of you, Andrew. I do see why it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm so glad it turned out so beautifully for both of you guys. Okay, so then the next inevitable, obvious question is, what is it like being married to another writer, especially at your level? And living together and making that work. And Tasha, I know you opened and said it's been wonderful, but I'm just curious, how, did it take a while? Did you have to evolve with this? How have you made it work?
Well, first of all, as with everything we do, we tend to just jump in with both feet and start as we mean to go on. It really was easy from the beginning. I think partly because if you're married to another writer, there are a lot of parts of the writing process that seem inconceivably bizarre to anyone on the outside. And I know this won't come as a shock to anyone, but writers are very neurotic. And, we're always worried that this book will be the one that is the book that should have never been started. And, you have a lot of insecurities that plague you while you're writing, and writing is a very isolating endeavor because it's just you and your computer. So to be married to someone who completely understands that is just such a gift. It's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, because it really is a ridiculous thing to do for a living, making up stories and, getting all frustrated because these characters that don't exist, they only exist in your head, aren't doing the things that you want them to do, or the storylines won't tie up, or you've got some hole in the plot that is driving you crazy when none of it happened anyway. So it is really useful to have somebody that understands the frustrations of it. And I had a couple of very good friends in England. One is a playwright, and one, I met her when we were both working in a telecommunication company. And, he would sometimes be struggling with a play that he was writing. He'd get up in the morning and sort of go downstairs, lie on the couch, because he was really trying to get some problem figured out that he just could not get to the bottom of. It's the most frustrating thing in the world to him. But then she would get up, she would get the kids up, she would get them dressed and fed and take them to school, and then go to the office and work a whole day at the office, and then go and collect the kids, then bring them home and feed them and bath them and get them put into bed. And at the end of all of that, he was still lying on the couch, and she would go in and he would say, "Oh, I've had the worst, I've had a terrible day, I've had an awful day." She would say, "Well, let me tell you about having an awful day." And they were both right, but it was just that the two different worlds didn't fully mesh. Whereas with us, we do. And if we're at a particular point, there are many different stages in writing a book. You can't just sort of sit down and immediately start writing it. There are lots of things that you have to do leading up to that. And some of them make it look like you're not doing anything at all, like the day that you spend laying on the couch because you can't figure out the answer to a problem. And, we understand what that is, and we're not saying to each other, there's a strange thing about writing in that there's always this urge to kind of not start yet because, what if you have a better idea next week? There's always something to stop you. So there's a way in which you have to just force yourself to sit down and get on with it. But at the same time, if there's something holding you back, you have to trust that instinct that says that's because the idea isn't fully formed enough yet, or because there's a problem, or that you've made a mistake somewhere that your subconscious is warning you about. So you have this fine balancing act where you have to sometimes push yourself forward and sometimes hold yourself back. So there can be days when you were expecting to be very busy and hoping to be very productive, but actually you do end up really with nothing to show for it. And, you have to just sort of, when you know what that feeling is like, then you can support the other person and reassure them that it was the right thing to do.
Because you can have that you're feeling behind, and yet you can't sit at the computer and type because it always, you look like you're working when you're sitting at the computer and typing, right? That seems like work. But sometimes you have to go out for a walk because it's not right in your head. And if your spouse didn't really understand that is a form of working, you really have to, I think with writing, like Andrew was saying, you get this, it's almost a physical feeling when either something is not right or you're not quite ready to start writing the first draft of the manuscript. And so you can physically feel this, and you can physically feel when it is right. And at the same time, when you're not feeling it, doing things like going for a walk, or you want some sort of activity that engages a piece of your brain, but not all of your brain, because it's like your subconscious is doing its work in the background. And so you might be saying, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so much time pressure. And then, your spouse could be like, yeah, and you went to the mountains and hiked for 3 hours. So how is that getting the book written? But we understand that actually that sometimes that is how you're getting the book written.
That's
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And also just all the, it's a wonderful thing to have a book come out into the world, but at the same time, you're really nervous about it and you hope that someone other than your mother will like it. And so it's a very personal thing, your book. And people are very, happy to send you really kind of scathing emails about everything you did wrong. And so it's nice to have someone else who understands that.
And how vulnerable that feels. Yeah. I never thought about that. And I actually have a good question about that later on. Exactly what you just said. Okay, let's go back to the beginning and just get a little background on your writer's story. And I'm going to start with Tasha, with Lady Emily. And I don't know how far you want to go back, but I guess we are all curious about, how did you create this character? I read somewhere, I liked what somebody said, that she's a pistol. And, how I also know from reading it, and from reading interviews with you, that historical accuracy is very important, that you put a lot into that. So I'm curious with how did you come up with her? And the other thing is, just in talking to my co-hosts, we wondered, because we've seen your personality a little bit, we wonder, is there any bit of you in Lady Emily?
Well, it's a great question. And bringing in how Emily came into being and the historical accuracy thing, they really meld, because what happened was, and this was probably a year before I started writing, I just had this really, I don't know where it came from, this just absolutely clear image in my head of a young Victorian woman. I could tell that by her clothes, standing on the cliff path in Ermirovigli in Santorini, the Greek island. And I had been there once, but I was like, where did this come from? Like, why am I picturing this? But it was such a strong image that I actually wrote it down. And then promptly put it in a file folder somewhere and, didn't think about it again for a long time. Because I guess my son at that point must have been about 2. And, if you have a 2-year-old underfoot all the time, you're not really thinking, what I'll do is sit down and write a novel. That's a great idea.
Right. There's no way that's going to happen.
Right, exactly. But what I was doing, we were living in New Haven, Connecticut at the time, and I would go to the library almost every day with him. I would put him in the stroller because it was a little too far for a 2-year-old to walk to. It was a couple, maybe 2 or 3 miles away from our apartment. And the strollers have those big baskets underneath them. And as far as I was concerned, that was just a book transport mechanism. So we would go to the library. And, we would go to the adult section first, and I would get a bunch of books, and then we'd go to the children's room, and he would, look around in the children's room, and I could kind of like half read and watch him while he was looking at books. And I read so much in that kind of time period. And before he was born, I had a series of just utterly soul-crushing jobs that I was not good at all. The last of which was being a pharmaceutical sales rep. I wanted the company car. We didn't have any money, and I thought the car would be good, but it was a disaster. And the thing that I noticed through those years when I was doing these various jobs so that we could pay rent and have health insurance, I really started to become aware of how much in our society we identify ourselves by our jobs. Because, you go to a party or you go to a meeting or you go to whatever, and people are like, oh, what do you do? What's your job? Like, that's the interesting thing about you. I mean, it was certainly, my jobs were not that interesting. And I got in the habit, because I had always wanted to write from the time I was a very little girl. I got in the habit of saying, I'm a whatever the current crappy job was, but I want to be a writer. And I was always saying, but I want to be a writer, but I want to be a writer. So one day after my son and I came back from the library, I had checked out a book called Gaudy Night by Dorothy L. Sayers.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
this wonderful, wonderful British author who wrote in the 1920s, and she was an Oxford, she was a Dante scholar, and then wrote these wonderful, wonderful mysteries. And to make a long story still long, I was reading that book, and in that particular volume, Sayers has a character who has fallen in love with the protagonist, Lord Peter Wimsey, who's the detective in the series. And over the various books, they've fallen in love, and Harriet does love Lord Peter, but she's very worried about getting married. And I swear this does come back to inspiring me to actually write. She's talking to her friend. So Lord Peter has actually proposed to her, and she's not sure if she should marry him because it's the 1920s. Britain in the 1920s was not a place where a married woman could just do what she wanted. And Harriet was rightly concerned that if she married Peter, she wouldn't be able to do what she wants. So she's having a conversation with a friend of hers, and her friend says, no, it doesn't matter if you marry him or not. If you know what it is that you want to do, and you really know it's what you want to do, you will find a way to do it no matter what. Everything will be steamrolled in your way. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. Wow. Because for years I'd been saying, oh, but I want to be a writer, and then, I had the jobs, and then I got a baby, and you can't write a book when you have a baby. And then there's always a reason that you can't write, right? But when I read that, I just thought, she's correct. And if this is what I really want to do, then I need to stop saying it, and I have to sit down and actually write something. And so the next day, I pulled out that file, and I found that little scribble that I had scribbled about the Victorian woman on the cliff path in Santorini. And I started to write the book, and that became And Only to Deceive, the first book in the series. And the way I really kind of started, I had that image, and I thought, okay, and this is where the historical accuracy comes in. How could a woman that kind of age in that kind of time wind up in Santorini? And so I started asking myself questions about that. And then I answered them in ways that were historically accurate. And that's how I came that she had to be a widow, because she couldn't be unmarried, but she couldn't be married. And, so it's like you start at, and then I was like, well, she has to have money, because how is she in Santorini? And so I was asking these questions about how a person like that in that time period could be there. That was how it all started. Okay. Which is a very long answer, and I apologize.
It's a wonderful answer. It's amazing how answering those questions started molding that wonderful character. Wow. Okay, Andrew, let me come to you and ask, I know just a little bit about you, and what is intriguing to me that you started, it sounds like really one of your first big things was this theater that it sounds like to me, you were running it with maybe friends and colleagues. And I don't know if that was right after school, but that's a really big undertaking. And I'm sure it must be a passion. And I'm just curious how that evolved. And then how did that, lead to other jobs and then eventually writing? And
you're absolutely right. Yeah, theater was my first love, because, unlike Tasha, I never really thought of writing. I never wanted to be a writer. I never had any kind of ambition to be a writer, but I did always love telling stories. And, even as a little kid, I would always be telling stories. And it's back in the days when there weren't seat belts in the back of cars, and people weren't too worried about their kids being, all strapped down in, bulletproof, containers, So when we would drive anywhere, I've got three brothers. They're all much older than me, so they'd all left home. So if we were going somewhere, going to visit my grandparents, or going on vacation or something, I would be standing on the floor, standing up in the back with an arm around both of the front seats, and I would just tell stories to my parents. And then that continued I just always continued. Everywhere I went, it was just all about telling stories. If I hadn't done my homework in high school, I never worried, because I could always come up with a story that was sufficiently, wild, that the teachers would, even if they didn't believe it, they kind of gave me credit for having, come up with something so imaginative. So, storytelling was big. Then I went to university initially to do English literature, and I absolutely hated it. It was horrible. In university in England, it's a little different, because you don't pick your school and then once you've been there for a while, choose a major. You have to, when you apply to a school, you have to apply for a particular course. So I applied for English literature. My teachers told me not to, but I've always been known, if someone says that I shouldn't or couldn't do something, that always made me want to do it more. Okay. So I applied, I started doing English literature, and I just absolutely hated it. The reason I applied was that I loved it at high school, because we had fabulous teachers there, and they encouraged you to read the books or the poems or the plays or whatever and come up with your own ideas. And then really the class became a kind of venue for arguing. You would say, well, I think it's X. The teachers wouldn't care. They would just want to see, well, if you could defend your position. So they'd say, no, surely it's Y, and you'd have to justify it. And I loved it. That was my favorite thing. So I thought, well, at university it would be like that, but even bigger and better. But it turned out I could not have been more wrong, because at university, they weren't just regular teachers. They were professors with, international reputations who published, the definitive guide to a particular play or a particular author. And they didn't like it if you disagreed with them. They took it as an insult or as an affront. There was one teacher, I was in a class in 1986, and I disagreed with this teacher, and he said to me that he was the world's leading authority on this subject, and I had to apologize and admit that he was right, or else leave. So he's still waiting for his apology.
Good.
He's going to be waiting for it for a lot longer as well. I didn't really like the English literature at all, but I couldn't switch course dramatically without dropping out and starting again the next year, which, to my father in particular, that would have sounded too much like giving up, which is just, not acceptable. So the most I could do was to change a little bit to doing dual English literature and drama. And the drama just set me on fire, because it was, it's the most authentic way of telling a story, isn't it? Because you're not reading the words on a page. You've got people standing in front of you, speaking the words, acting out the actions. So it completely captivated me. I spent all my time either doing the drama for the course or working at the university theatre. They had a fantastic, professional quality theatre that was wonderful to work in. And during the course of the drama part, when you're doing anything where you have exams involved, it's a little bit like sort of pushing, you're walking down a corridor, you push open a door here, you go in just far enough to pass that part of the course, then you have to go further down the corridor and poke open the next door, poke your nose in there. And 6 of us at the end of it, we felt like we were quite frustrated, because we'd seen enough in each of these rooms down the corridor to want more, but not to have been able to finish it because of the demands of the course. So we said to ourselves, before the 9 to 5 set in and the mortgages and everything else, we didn't have to worry about health insurance, luckily. But until those kind of things kicked in, we thought, well, why don't we, have our own theatre company? No good trying to join someone else's, because then, we would have to do what they wanted to do. Why not have our own theatre company? Then we could just be completely self-indulgent, do exactly what we wanted. So that's what we did. We started it. I didn't do any acting, because I'm rubbish at acting.
I wondered about that.
I did the kind of, backstage technical stuff. And
he's a brilliant stage manager / producer. He's going to say I'm biased, and I will say, yes, I am, but that does not mean I'm wrong.
That's right.
So we did the theatre company for a couple of years. We were, really remarkably organized looking back. We figured out before we started a list of things that we wanted to achieve. We wanted to go to the Edinburgh Festival. We wanted to do a nationwide tour. We wanted to do some work in schools. We had various things. And it took longer than we thought. We thought it would take about a year, but really it took 2 years. but we did everything we set out to do. Except, you know, as you can imagine, if you have a small independent theatre company that no one has ever heard of, and you're producing plays that you write yourself, so no one has heard of them, you make no money at all. In fact, it's like a black hole for money. You know, the money just, any money that you can get instantly disappears. So at the end of the time, I was broke. So I wanted a job. So not full-time, not permanent. I just wanted to fix the hole in my bank account. So this was before the internet. So in order to get a job in those days, you had to buy the Sunday Times in England and get the job section and look for something that you thought might be suitable. But you know, the truth was that no jobs were really suitable because I have no useful skills whatsoever. So I was very scientific. I cut out all of the adverts that I thought I might be able to apply for, and I ranked them in order of starting salary. And I applied for the one that had the largest number. And fortunately, I got the job. And I thought I'd only stay a couple of years, but I wound up in that industry for 15 years. And because I was on the road all the time, I couldn't really get to the theatre very much because, you know, you'd hear about a show that was opening, so you'd buy tickets, but then you'd be away that week, so you missed it. Or you'd think there's no point in buying tickets, and then you turn out you weren't away, but then you couldn't get the tickets because you'd left it too late. So just naturally, I gravitated more towards reading, and without thinking about it, I honed in on, you know, crime fiction, spy fiction, action adventure, those type of books. Yeah. Stuff that I'd read when I was a kid, I suppose, and I was just picking up the same threads. And there was a fatal day where I was reading a particular book, and it started off so brilliantly. One of those books where, you know, your house could be on fire, but you just still wouldn't leave because you just had to keep turning the pages. You know, you would miss the stop on the train, you would, you know, whatever it was, there was nothing that could distract you. But then when I got to the end of the book, it was horrible. And I remember thinking, well, why did the author do that? Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he have the hero do this? Why, you know, why didn't he connect back to this thing that had started earlier? And that's just like an itch that begins, you know, you get this itch and you have to scratch it. You have to find out if you can do it or not. So, you know, by this point, my brother was pretty well established. So, you know, I thought, well, that proves it can be done. So why not give it a try and see what happens? You know, I've always heard, I heard somewhere that the two saddest words in the English language are what if. So I didn't want to get to the end of my career and think, well, I didn't really enjoy that, but what if I tried to be a writer? You know, I knew it might not work, but I thought better to try and fail than not try at all. So I took the plunge and went for it.
Well said. And your storytelling really is at the foundation of all of that. And you've been doing that all your life in different forms. That's really interesting.
I think that's the thing, you know, that there are, to my mind, I know there are, you know, creative writing courses and things like that, but to my mind, that the only real training to be a writer you do without realizing it, because the main thing that you do is you read, which, you know, we're so grateful to the libraries to enable us to do. And then you have to, you know, you have to have a passion for the story part, you know, and you do all that, you know, when you're a little kid. When I was a little kid going to the library in Birmingham, England with my mum, you know, I was getting books and I was loving reading them. I had no idea that it was actually training me for my future career.
Yeah, you were just having fun with it like we all do. One question that's come up while you guys have been talking is somebody is asking, this ties back to being a storyteller and starting with Lady Emily. How much research, how do you do your research? How much do you do? How do you decide how much is enough and how much is too much and so on?
Well, that is always the crux of things with any kind of historical fiction, because if you write historical fiction, it's because you have to like the research, and you know, you could literally spend a lifetime just doing the research, and of course then your publisher might be a bit unhappy that you never delivered a manuscript.
Your readers would be sad.
Right.
Not to get into
so I do a lot of research. I recently, it dawned on me that the best way to explain my kind of process is that I'm the writer equivalent of a method actor. So if I'm writing a book set in Italy, I'm gonna, like, on the side try to study some Italian. We're gonna eat nothing but Italian food while I'm working on the book from the region that the book is set in. But generally what I do to start is I go to really good academic secondary sources. So if there's a good history of the time or place, and then once I kind of have an overview of that, then I go into primary sources. I really like to do a lot with diaries and letters and things like that, because it gives you not just because the truth is we're not always accurate in our own diaries, are we? Or in our letters, which in a way are the 19th century equivalent of social media. You're probably going to put the best picture of yourself up, not, this train wreck that we all often are, or well, maybe not often. Well, I am, but I like that because it gives you real insight into what mattered to people then, what they were worried about, how they talked, just like what kind of words they were using, how they were phrasing things. And then we always do like to go and visit the place. And Andrew is always kind of my poor unpaid research assistant on these trips, which are wonderful, but a lot of work. I mean, we will have 15-hour days where we'll walk 10 miles, because I always feel like if we're in a place, you need to walk everywhere, because otherwise you don't really get to know the city well.
Yeah, so get in. Mm-hmm.
And that's because it really struck me when I was working on my fourth book, which was set in Constantinople. And I had done months of research. I had hundreds of pictures of the book was set, I think, in 1894. I had hundreds of pictures, photographs from Istanbul at the time, and maps. And I had read so much. I felt like I really, really knew that city like the back of my hand. And then I took a research trip. Before I met Andrew, so it was just me. I go to Istanbul because you can't go back to Constantinople, obviously. And I got there and I just, this is nothing like, it didn't feel like I thought it would feel. And so until you're there and you hear the sound of the language and you're eating the food, and in Istanbul, you've got, the call to prayer coming throughout the day, and you just notice different things that I find it very hard to notice if you're not actually physically in the place. So it's important to me. I couldn't do that at the very beginning of my career. So in fact, my first two books were set places that I had been. But now I always do that. Although right now I'm writing this book about Egypt, and COVID has made it so that I have not gone to Egypt. So we'll see. We'll see if that can happen.
Okay.
Yeah,
and
that was a trip.
That's one thing I wondered, how the pandemic has affected you guys as writers. So there you go. You would have been there maybe. Okay.
Yeah, so we've got the trip now set theoretically for November. I will have actually finished writing. I will have turned in the book, but I thought, well, at least I can go back and revise. But who knows if it's going to be safe to travel in November? I don't know.
Right.
In Egypt, but we'll see.
Okay.
Although that said, other than not being able to do that sort of thing and doing Zoom events instead of being able to come in person, our work life is pretty much the same, because we just sit at home and make things up.
Okay. And that makes very good sense. Very good. Okay, talking about making things up, Andrew, I'm curious, talking about research with your thrillers. I mean, I don't think you're going around, as far as I know, you're not a CIA member, but you sure sound like one. I read Invisible.
He was recruited by MI5.
Oh my God. Oh, exciting.
He says he didn't take the job. That's what he says. Yes. I wonder.
Okay, well, I wonder about that, because when I read Invisible, the Pomograph Janitor series, I thought, wow, this just seems very detailed. You really seem to know what you're talking about. So how do you come up with that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, for contemporary things like I write, the research process is very different really from Tasha's, because I really feel like there are sort of two kinds of research. One is the sort that you're doing all the time, even if you're not meaning to. Every news article that you read, every story that you see on the news, Everything that you see in everyday life is kind of feeding into the sort of reservoir of information somehow. So that is for me where the broad sort of basis of the stories come from. And then what I'll do beyond that, so for example, the book that I just wrote with my brother, that involved ransomware as one of the themes. And that wasn't something that I set out to research specifically for the book. It was something that I'd read about ages ago, when it was first sort of being discovered. And I found it interesting. I thought, it's a new kind of crime that I'd not come across before. So I read a lot about it just out of curiosity. And then when it came time to write that book, and I was thinking, okay, what are we going to do? I thought, well, maybe, maybe a good scenario would be Reacher arrives in a small town, finds something weird going on, tries to find out what it is, and he's told that it's this thing called ransomware, which, he has got no idea what that's all about. So that automatically takes him out of his element and puts him on the back foot. So there's that kind of broad research that you do all the time. My first book, even, I remember reading about one of the typical scams of the time, one of the identity fraud scams that was going on, again, just out of interest. Actually, it was still when I still had a job in telecoms, I was waiting to visit a client. I was reading a newspaper in their reception, and there was a big story about it. And I remember reading it because it was interesting and stuff like that. It just, that fuels the basis of the story. But then on top of that, you then have the specifics. And in a way, that you kind of do that. You do that once you know more about what the story is going to be. So for Invisible, that series that is set, the guy works as a janitor at the courthouse in New York. So I went to New York and I went to the courthouse and, poked around and, sneaked into all the areas that you're not supposed to sneak into. And, just to see what the place was like, to see what it smelled like and what it looked like and what color the paint was. Was it fresh or was it not fresh? And, weird things that I found out about, like the fact that there is, it's now decommissioned, but there's a nuclear fallout shelter in the basement of it, things like that you come across that, you then can use in a more specific way. And again, with thrillers, you've got a lot of stuff where you've got to get the details right. Like if somebody's using a particular kind of gun, you have to get that right. If somebody's in a particular kind of car, you have to have those details right. And those are the things, those are specifics that you can check up on later. Just the other day, I was writing a scene that involved a guy had to get from one place to another in a certain length of time. So I thought, too far to go in a car, maybe he could go in a helicopter. And then you think, well, okay, well, how fast do helicopters fly? How far can they go without refueling? Luckily these days it's easy to find that stuff out, but those are the specifics. You don't start out with those, but later when you need to make sure that something is going to work in the context of the story, you can go back and check. So yeah, I do those two kinds of research. You never know what you're going to see and what you're going to hear. There was one time, I still want to put this in a story. We went to meet a friend at a bar that we liked when we lived in Chicago, and we were sitting and chatting, and I saw a woman. There were three guys at a table, well, actually in a booth opposite us. And a woman arrived. She was wearing a very smart business suit, and she had a kind of large purse with a big manila envelope sticking out of it. And she came and sat down. And I remember just looking at that thinking, all right, what's in the envelope? Why has she brought it? Is she going to give it to one of these guys? Are they going to steal it from her? All of those things, that's how your mind works. It's probably not the best thing really, but everything you see, you're connecting back to. You're looking at it, you're looking to see what it actually is, you're looking to see what it might be, what it could be. It's alarming sometimes. Actually, once one of my books involved poison gas, and it was when I was traveling back and forth from Chicago to London a lot, and I'd done a lot of reading about a gas attack in one of the old Soviet provinces, and I'd written down So I like to do my notes longhand rather than just do them on the computer. So I'd written down, you know, my own handwriting on paper, the chemical formula for the gas, the amount of concentration that was required if you wanted to be certain that it was going to be lethal, you know, all of these things. Then I'm lining up at some immigration at O'Hare, and I'm thinking, oh God, if they look in my briefcase, you know.
Oh, you could have been in trouble. Oh my
Oh
God.
yeah.
Okay, here's a really good question about research that somebody just asked. How much did he research janitors for the Pomograph? Because you do talk about specific janitorial work. And I love that.
Again, that was one of the kind of, well, that was one of the specific kind of, you know, the second kind of research, because in order for the story to work, it was necessary for the character to go, you know, he had his military intelligence background, and he needed to find stuff out about what was happening at the courthouse. And so initially I thought about it and I thought, well, what kind of thing could you do if you wanted to be able to go anywhere in the courthouse, see anything, have an excuse to be in any place, you know, having been chased out of it every time I went near it, you know, the interesting part, without anybody asking any questions or really anybody even noticing you. And I thought about it and I thought, well, you know, what about the janitors? You know, they're the kind of people, you know, right back to my theatre days, I had a thing where I insisted on the program, all the credits in the program were always alphabetical order, because I didn't agree with this idea that, you know, the lead actor should have the big, be at the beginning and the big letters, and the guy that swept the stage should be at the bottom, because, you know, if the stage wasn't swept, then the big name actor couldn't do his thing or her thing. So, you know, I've always been big on, you know, the importance, the contribution that the so-called little people make. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if actually the hero turned out to be, you know, this invisible, you know, hence the name of the book, anonymous guy. And in fact, it became essential that he was anonymous. And part of the kind of the shtick of the series is that the last line of each book is always along the lines of the person that the janitor has helped will come to him and say, you know, I don't understand. I mean, how did everything get put right? You know, you were the only one that knew about it. Was it you? And he always says, how could it be me? I'm just the janitor, you know? And so it became important to me that he was the janitor, that he was the hero, even though it was a role that's typically not thought of as being heroic. So yeah, then I had to find out what you do when you're a janitor. You know, what kind of equipment do you have? What do you use? What I liked about it is that, you know, you can go online and look at all the catalogs of, you know, the different kinds of equipment, but when you see what real janitors do, they always kind of customize it a little bit. They always tweak, you know, the kind of carts that you have so that you can get to your equipment more easily, or you can take the exact kind of equipment that you want. So I love, you know, the way that you start off with the sort of the plain vanilla, what it's supposed to be and what you can easily buy online, and then what people do with it and how they use it, and, you know, what it feels like to do the job. Is it boring? Is it satisfying? You know, so, you know, I just tried to find out as much about, you know, real janitors as possible.
Wonderful. That was a good question from Megan. Okay, I have another big one, but before I get to that, let me just explore two things because I'm worried I'll run out of time. Tasha, or with both of you, I want to talk about long-running series because Andrew's coming into one, and Tasha, you've created one. How do you keep yourself? Is it hard to keep yourself interested and, you know, creatively excited, you know, and fresh with it? How have you dealt with that?
So I mean, of course, when I wrote my first book, I didn't know it would be a long series. I desperately hoped it would be, because I really love reading a long series. I read really fast. And so that's great in some ways because you can read lots of books, but it's horrible because you read them too fast and then they're over. Right. And with a series, you get those characters back again and again and again. And I love that because it just feels like you're sitting down with old friends. So when I started, I thought that, to me, what I wanted was to have a really solid group of characters. So you're going to have, obviously Emily's always there and Colin is always going to be there, but I wanted a great group of secondary characters who could come in and out in different books, so that isn't always the same. But I really wanted to have the locations be different because, I mean, first of all, it's just obviously it's fresh if you've got a completely new location and a different culture and that sort of thing. But beyond that, even somebody who's a really great traveler is going to be a little bit not different, but it's going to be formed by the experience they have in a new culture. So putting Emily into Ottoman Constantinople brings out sides of her that we might not see when she's in Vienna or if she's in Paris or she's in Venice. And so I felt like it was a way to just, on an obvious level, have it be different, because it wouldn't always be the gaslit streets of London. Oh, here we are again, annoyed with Scotland Yard. I didn't want it to be like that, but I wanted the characters to provide the continuity and the location to bring more depth to the characters, while at the same time giving like I said, an obvious difference for the reader to get to know a different place.
Yes, yeah, to make it fun for them, but fun for you too.
Absolutely, and it's so interesting to just explore different places within a range of time, because like with that Constantinople book, the reason I wanted to send Emily to Constantinople was I thought, big thing with her is that women are treated so horribly, right? And it's Victorian culture was so repressive to women. So I thought, right, let's get her to Constantinople. The Ottomans are going to be way more repressive to women, and she's going to see a different side of this. But then I started doing the research, and you know what? Ottoman women in the 19th century had way more freedom than their British counterparts, which completely stunned me.
Oh my gosh.
Completely stunned me. They could own property separately from their husbands. They could get a divorce and keep their children and all kinds of things. And there was actually this wonderful exchange not exchange, I guess an exchange. It was written by Lady Mary Whately Montagu, who was the wife of the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire earlier in the 19th century. Actually, maybe she was even like bordering late 18th, early 19th century. But at any rate, she was writing letters to her friends and back in Britain, and was recounting a story about a conversation she'd had with some of her Ottoman friends. And she had said to them, I can't believe that you have to wear these veils. It's so awful. You're not even allowed to show your face. This is so repressive and terrible. And I just don't know how you tolerate it. And her friend said, yeah, we don't really understand why you don't wear veils, because we can go meet our lovers and sit in a cafe in the center of town. Nobody knows it's us. We can do whatever we want because no one knows it's us. They can't see our faces. And I just thought, wow, they're literally taking what we view as this object of repression and getting freedom out of that. And I just, so there's so many interesting things that crop up when you put characters in a different culture.
Oh my gosh. Oh, very interesting. No, I did not understand that at all. Very interesting. Okay. Before we run out of time, Andrew, can you talk about how you're making a transition with your brother's amazing character, Jack Reacher? I will tell you that I would say I take more people over to the Jack Reacher books than anything else in the library. So it's a much beloved series, which is both exciting, I'm sure, but maybe also brings its own challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came about, how you feel about it, and where you're at in the process?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and everything you said is absolutely right. Exciting but daunting at the same time. But I think that the Reacher series and the Emily series are really interesting ones to contrast, because what Tasha very deliberately did with Emily was to start off with a very sheltered, very naive, very cloistered woman, and then as each book goes by, Emily learns more, she becomes more sophisticated, she becomes more, less naive, more worldly. And so you see and revel in that growth in the character, which is one of the delights of the series. But the Reacher series is kind of the opposite. Our father was Irish, and so he could get away with these things. He had an expression, the same, only different. And really, that's what my brother set out to do with each Reacher book, to make it the same, only different. Reacher never changes. Reacher is not about to become a tree-hugging pacifist. Somebody crosses him in book 1, book 10, book 30. They're going to get the same result, right. So I think it's fascinating to see two series that both have that kind of long-term appeal, but really for the opposite reasons. So Reacher was fascinating to me, because when my brother started to write, he had been working in television and he got fired. And so he decided that as an alternative to trying to find a job in some other industry, he would write a book. So, he famously went out and bought his pad of yellow paper and his pencil and sat down to write Killing Floor. And the boat was on the opposite foot in those days. I had a really good job at a telecommunication company. And, I was looking at my brother thinking, is he going to be able to put food on the table next week, So he, when he finished the book, I was the first person to read it. And it was a horrifying experience, because I'm thinking, what if it's no good? What if it's terrible? Because not only am I the one who's going to have to tell my brother that his writing sucks, but then how's he going to feed his family? Am I going to have to start sending him food parcels? I was really worried about it. But of course, it turned out that the book was magnificent. And for those of you that have read it, you'll know that it's written in the first person. So you're seeing everything through the character's eyes, understanding how he thinks and what motivates him. But the way the story unfolds is ages before you find out his name. And so I remember so clearly thinking, I don't know this character's name, but I know this character, because my brother is very like me. We approach things in the same way. We have the same attitudes, the same tastes, the same values. So, for the first few years, it was hilarious actually, because when that book was about to come out in England in hardcover, I was saying to everybody I knew, all my friends, all my colleagues at work, my brother's written this book, it's really good, you should buy it. And they're like, oh, I don't know. What's it called? Oh, Lee Child, that sounds weird. I don't know. And then fast forward a few years, and I was deluged every time, every October when there was a new Reacher coming out, I'd be deluged with people saying, hey, can you talk to your brother? Can you get me a copy? Can you get it signed? And so it was a complete 180-degree turn. But I grew up, for more than a quarter of a century, I was basically living with Reacher in a sense. When my brother and I would hang out, it was like he was a sort of an extra imaginary brother. Something would happen in real life or on TV, and we'd joke about it. We'd say, well, what would Reacher do about that? What would Reacher think about that? We talk about, somebody that had a Reacher moment, when they'd had to go off on someone,
Yeah.
So, Reacher was very, very familiar to me. And so the way it wound up that I've become involved with the series is that when I guess it was maybe it was I forget that they blur into one of the Pomograph books was coming out, and it was launched in January time, and because we live in Wyoming, they decided to do the launch event down at the Tattered Cover in Denver. So I said to my brother, do you want to come? And he said, sure. So we decided to drive down together. So he wanted to go in his car so that he could smoke. So he drove down, and when you're getting ready to do an event like that, all you can think about is the event. You're hoping that you don't trip over your feet on the way to your chair. You're hoping that you don't say something stupid. You're hoping you don't forget your name.
Yeah.
So all you can think about is that. So then when it was finished, I was very relieved. I was very happy because the event went well. And then he asked if I would drive home. So I'm driving along, and it's January, northern Colorado into southern Wyoming. The weather is horrendous, and we got one of these things that they call a ground blizzard, where the snow blows really fast, horizontally at about from ground to about 10 feet. So you can see nothing. So I was concentrating completely on not crashing. I even said to my brother as we were setting off, I said, look, you know, this is 50-50 whether we make it home or we wind up in a ditch.
Oh.
And so at a certain moment, he just said to me, so listen, I was thinking, I'm thinking of retiring. So how about you take over writing Reacher? And he did it deliberately at that moment because he knew that I would be so prepossessed with not killing us that I wouldn't be able to have a knee-jerk reaction. And later he said that he had been plotting this for ages because he had got this sense that he probably only had another 2 or 3 books sort of left in him. And he'd always made a promise that, you know, really to the readers, that he would never do anything less than 100%. And he thought, I can do another 2, I can probably do another 3, but beyond that, what am I going to do? And so, you know, back in the days of the in-person events, for years, people would ask him, so how long is the series going to run? How is it going to end? And back when he'd written 4 or 5 books, you know, he would say, oh, you know, when I've done, you know, 20 odd, then, you know, maybe I'll have Reacher bleed to death on the floor of a grimy motel bathroom. And at the time, people weren't too worried about it because they figured there was plenty of time. But then as it was getting closer and closer and closer to that being a reality, the reaction was so, you know, you could see people were so disappointed. They didn't want there to be no more Reacher. So my brother was torn because he couldn't allow himself to do anything less than 100%, but he didn't want to stop because then that would leave people disappointed. So he said that he had this kind of weird daydream where he thought to himself, if only I could take some kind of potion and wake up like 15 years younger, you know, with all the associated sort of energy and enthusiasm that would come with that. And then he said it dawned on him, wait a minute, 3 miles up the road is Andrew. He is 15 years younger. So that's where the idea came from to ask me to do it, because then it's the best of both worlds. You know, he will be, you know, readers will still get their annual fix, and he won't ever be in a position of feeling that he's not doing the best possible job. So when he asked me, as you know, I was just trying not to crash the car. And the first thing I felt was just, you know, real shock. You know, Reach is this amazing worldwide phenomenon. The idea that you would trust anybody with it, let alone me, was crazy. But once I overcame that sort of emotion, the next thing that struck me was, well, could I do it? And then that sounded a bit like a challenge. And if there's one thing that's got me into more trouble in the course of my life than anything else, it's that I can never walk away from the challenge. So it felt like a challenge.
Yeah, he knew that. You think he didn't know that?
Yeah. When I was a little boy, if my dad thought there was something that was too hard for me to do, he would always say, like as an aside, pretending that like I wasn't supposed to hear, you know, he'd always say, oh, Andrew won't be able to do that. That would be far too hard. So he would know that would make me do it twice and take photographs, you know. So there was the challenge aspect to it. And just like when I started writing, you know, I didn't want to ever be in the position of saying, well, what if? I wanted to try, and I thought better, you know, whatever happens, it's always better to try. And then the final thing, the thing that really cemented it in my mind was that realization that if I didn't do it, then there would be no more Reachers. And I don't want to, I've lived with, you know, I've looked forward to the new Reacher for every year for a quarter of a century. I didn't want there to be no more Reachers, and I certainly didn't want to be responsible for there being no more Reachers. So I said I would do it. And then once we got around to talking about the practicalities, then at some point there were discussions between me, my brother, our agents, the publishers in London and in New York. And what we came up with was the idea that we really wanted continuity. You know, we wanted this injection of sort of new energy, new enthusiasm. Lee was very keen that, you know, there was a bit more of a sort of up-to-date technological aspect to it that had been sort of missing for a while. But, you know, we also wanted the continuity. We wanted the character to be the same. We wanted the language to be the same. We wanted the storytelling to be the same. So we decided the thing to do would be to write the next, you know, 2 or 3, whatever it might turn out to be, together. And then at some point when everybody was comfortable with it, switch over to me writing them on my own. So, you know, we've gone through this transitional process, which was of course made more complicated by the fact that there was a pandemic. which meant that you couldn't, sit in the same room as each other all the time. So, there've been a few challenges and hurdles along the way, but we're very happy with how it's going, and we're enjoying it immensely.
I'm so glad, and boy, there's millions of fans that are so grateful to you and your brother. All right, I feel selfish for asking all my questions when there's a very good one here. Okay, did you have authors you looked up to early in your careers? If so, what caught your attention or interest in their work personalities? Did you have authors you looked
Well,
up?
I would say like I really looked up to Elizabeth Peters. I fell in love with her Amelia Peabody series and the way that she so seamlessly blends all of that wonderful history, but also then not just of Edwardian England, of British expats in Egypt. Well, they're not exactly expats, but we're archaeologists. She gets the archaeology, and she gets the ancient Egyptian history, and she gets all of the really fascinating British cultural stuff. And at the same time, she's telling this amazing story. And so she was just always someone that I really, really looked up to. And I remember reading, and I never got to meet her, sadly. But I remember reading an interview with her where somebody asked her about, because she, in the first Amelia book, says exactly how old Amelia is. And so the interviewer asked her about that. And she said, well, that at the time she had no idea that it was going to be a series. She thought it was going to just be another standalone. And she said if she had known that it was going to be this long series, she would never in a million years have ever said with any precise detail how old Amelia was. Because if you go through the whole series, by the end, I think Amelia and Emerson probably are in their 70s or something, and they're still just, racing up the Great Pyramid. And so she wished she would be vague about that. And so that's why no one will ever know how old Emily is.
Oh, okay. You learned well from your
I did.
Andrew, is there anybody especially that you've looked up to or caught your attention?
Yeah, I mean, not so much. I never really thought about the authors particularly. I never had the urge to kind of peek beyond the curtain, but I certainly there were a number of authors whose work I was just so enamored with. One of the early ones was Len Deighton, who wrote a lot of Cold War spy fiction. I loved his stuff. In particular, he wrote 3 trilogies, so nine books in a series following one character, and then he wrote a 10th book which kind of looked in at everything that happened in those 9 books from the outside and put some of it in a completely different context, which was really fascinating. I loved that. And then in terms of more modern stuff, I really loved people like the titans of the industry now, the Michael Connollys, the Jeffrey Devers, people like that. In fact, I actually I got into Michael Connolly by mistake because I was working in London, and I was on the train from London to Sheffield in England, and I saw this billboard in the days when books were advertised on big billboards, and it something about the copy just grabbed my attention. I thought, yeah, I'll buy that, and also when there were still bookstores in all the railway stations. So I arrived in Sheffield. I went to the little bookstore, and I was thinking, oh no, what was that book called that I saw on that billboard? And I looked at the new releases, and I saw one. I thought, oh yeah, that's it. So I bought it. It's this Michael Connolly book. It was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. And then the following week, I was on the same train, and I saw the same billboard, and it turned out that the one on the billboard was actually Jeffrey Dever, not Michael Connolly. So I went to the bookstore and bought that one, and I love that one too. But those guys have both done very different things, but they've done amazing things. One of the things I love about Michael Connolly is that he does this brilliant thing where he has most of his books in the Harry Bosch series, but every now and again he'll do a standalone. And if he likes the standalone. If he likes the characters, he'll then integrate those characters into the Bosch series going forward. So, it's a really, you're asking earlier about keeping series fresh, and, that's a great way of doing it. I don't know if anybody else really that does it that way. And it's another fantastic idea. So, those are the kind of guys that I would put on that list.
Okay, and I think you've got the other question we had, and I think you guys have both answered it a little bit, favorite books and authors. Do you read your own genre or avoid it? And I think Andrew's kind of was speaking to that the thriller genre. Tasha, do you still, do you like historical mysteries, or do you tend to look elsewhere just to have variety and other inspiration?
I definitely still read historical mysteries, and I reread the whole Amelia series once every year. And actually, this isn't historical, but this year, for the first time in, I don't even know how long, I went back and reread all the Poirot novels. And that was really fun. So I just love to read. So I just read everything, everything I can get my hands on.
Okay. Okay. I have a practical question. This is not very heavy, but we were talking about it before you guys joined us. We know that authors have their own way of working and, maybe own times of working. Are you guys able to meld when the hours you work, that you sit down, are you able to have enough space that you both can have your own routine? Is that ever an issue?
Well, this is part of the reason that we moved to Wyoming, because we were in a 2-bedroom apartment in the middle of Chicago, and that was not so great for 2 people working from home full time. So now it's very exciting. We each have our own office. They're actually on different floors of the house. But we don't really work at the same time. I am a morning person. I guess the way it is for me is that anything will distract me. So I get up, I make a pot of tea, I take it up to my office. If I'm in drafting mode, it's different when I'm in research mode, that's more fluid. But if I'm writing the first draft, pot of tea, to the computer, do literally nothing that could possibly distract me, and just start writing. And then I will take breaks and whatever, but I need to just get the work done first, or I will find reasons to never do the work.
Yeah.
Whereas you are more of a night owl.
Yeah, I tend to work late. I always have done. It's just, there's something about the daytime, there's too many distractions, but when it's night and there's just you and the pool of light that spreads from the computer screen, that's as if the world shrinks right down into that one little bubble. And then, there's nothing to get in the way and nothing to stop you from working. So I like to work late, and the closer I am to a deadline, the later I work. So it's I think you revert to the most extreme version of yourself. So I'm definitely not a morning person in any meaningful sense. I'm pretty much useless in the morning. I can sometimes make tea. That's about it.
He makes very good tea, but no matter what, we also normally aren't both writing drafts at the same time. So, and we always, no matter what, always sit down and have dinner.
Okay.
Yeah.
And visit each other during the day too.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
Andrew, I love how you set the scene with you writing late at night, and that seems perfect for your thrillers. I mean, it seems perfect timing. Okay, here's one more question from an audience member about do you ever get fans or prospective writers wanting you to mentor or advise them? And how do you respond to them? Now, I'm guessing if you do during the pandemic, that hasn't been doable anyways, but how is that something you've encountered?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely encounter that. And there's a very wide spectrum of what that looks like. Sometimes you will get people who kind of demand that you have your agent take them on. And it's like, that's not really how it works.
Yep.
My agent decides who she wants to take on.
Mm-hmm.
To people who just genuinely want to talk to you about ways of becoming a better writer and looking for advice. And you can get really lovely things that come out of that. Because, you know, it's such a tough industry. We both always have felt like if there's something we can do to help someone, we're going to absolutely do it. Absolutely do it. You have a really wonderful story about this.
Yeah, because, you know, picking up on one thing Tasha said there, it really depends on what kind of help people are looking for, and is it really a genuine? Is it genuine? Because often what will happen will be people will want to get you involved after they've written, you know, at least what they consider to be a kind of saleable version of their first book. And, you know, the way it goes is that often your first book doesn't sell, or it takes a long time to sell. And so sometimes people will be in a position where they think, okay, I've tried my hardest, I've written this book, it's as good as I can get it, I think it's good. Why isn't it selling? What's wrong with it? And then often those people fall into two categories. One of them is the kind of category that just wants you to say, yes, isn't it terrible? You know, the world is mean and horrible. It's really unfair that your book didn't sell. Because often it is very unfair, you know, often it's a time and place thing. It's whatever is popular at the time. It's, you know, a publishing house wants a sort of stable of authors that write different things. And if they already have 5 people who write what you write, you know, that's tough. If those 5 people have all just retired, then, you know, you're in with a shout. So, you know, there is a lot of luck involved. And if all the people want to do is kind of, you know, if they want someone to commiserate with them, there's not much you can do with that, really. But occasionally you get somebody who really does want the genuine advice. You know, the thing I wrote hasn't sold, I want it to sell, what do I need to do? And there was one chap a while ago who got in touch, and it was exactly this. He sent me, I happened to have some time, so I said, yeah, sure, I'll have a look. And when I read it, I could see that it had huge potential, but I could also see what I thought was holding it back from being sold. So I said to the guy, listen, absolute honesty here, do you really want help? Because it's not going to be nice, it's not going to be pleasant, it's not going to be fun to be told all the things that are wrong with your manuscript. But, you know, I have some ideas, and if you want to listen to them, I'm happy to tell you, and I think it will put you in a better position. And he said, no, I don't care how unpleasant it is, I want to know. So I told him, I said, you know, here are the things that I think work really well, and here are some things that I think don't work so well, and some ways that you might think about changing them. And he did it, and he's now, I think, on about his third book is out now. So, you know, there are times where, you know, it really is nice, because one of the good things about this industry, you know, I came from the telecommunications industry where, you know, every single person you met wanted to stab you in the front, in the back, you know, in both, you know, it was horrible, it was competitive, it was mean. Whereas this industry, even though we write about the most grotesque and appalling things, the vast majority of people are really, really nice. When I started, I couldn't believe how helpful and supportive people were. Loads and loads of people helped me. So, you know, you really do feel that it's one of those industries where you kind of pay it forward. If you have the opportunity to you know, add back to that sort of, you know, that pool of helpfulness, then, you know, we're more than happy to do it.
That's wonderful. And that is a lovely story. Thank you, Tasha, for getting him to share that. Thank you. One more quick question, because we're almost running out of time. I'm curious, are you ever surprised about your readers' relationship with your characters? You know, because I do know how we take
and
we make them our own. And, you know, does that ever surprise you? You know, something a fan will say about a character and how they feel about them?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some really wonderful experiences with readers who really are just madly in love with Jeremy Sheffield, the Duke of Bainbridge, Emily's dear friend. And you know, I love Jeremy, but, you know, not like that. And it's just wonderful. Like, they have this whole view of him as this person, and it's really that's really fun. I also had a great, I mean, I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but I had 2 wonderful young women who drove to see me in Ann Arbor one year, and they had a question about Emily's friend, Cecile. Cecile, who is this violently elegant Parisian of a certain age. And what they wanted to know was, how old is Cecile? If she's a woman of a certain age, did that mean she was like 30? And I remember thinking, 30 is a certain age. But, you know, we all read things in the context of our own lives. And so if you're, you know, I mean, I don't know how old, but, you know, when you're young, you think 30 is ancient. So it's just really fun to see how readers react.
Yeah. Andrew, have you ever had experience with that where something took you surprised about how people thought about your characters, your heroes?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think that the most rewarding thing is when you realize that somebody has really taken one of your characters to heart and it kind of has their own relationship with them, which is above and beyond what you'd ever imagined when you were writing them. I think it was my second book. There was I remember when it came out, it was a while after it had come out, I guess, because people had already had time to read it. And somebody at an event, I think in Houston, was talking to me about one of the characters called Mac. You know, Mac does this and Mac does that. And I'm like, there's no character called Mac. What are you talking about? And I realized there was one of the main characters was called McIntyre. And I realized that this was just lovely because she'd taken this guy, you know, and sort of, you know, reformed him into her own version. And, you know, I was absolutely delighted. It was one of the nicest things ever.
It really, it's the greatest. Like when those young women came to Ann Arbor, I still just think of them so fondly. Yeah, they made my day.
Yes, I see that, and I love it with Andrew's person. She had given him, that character, her own nickname, so you didn't even know that. You know, he had a new name you didn't even know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let me segue into getting one more quick from the audience. How long a break can you take, vacation type of break, without losing track of or interest in your characters or stories? This kind of brings it back to the character issue. You know, how long of a break before, you know, it's hard to get maybe back into it or track with them?
Well, I will say that, like, when I'm writing a first draft, I really can't take a day off, because a day is too long. I mean, sometimes you have to, you know, something weird happens, or, you know, you have a dental emergency or something. But I like to really stay in that story and in Emily's head to get the whole first draft down. But then I like to put the manuscript away for a few months, so that I can then go back to it with relatively fresh eyes. You can never really read your own book with fresh eyes, but so that I've got some distance from it and go back. And then I feel like, especially with a series, you know, I know those characters so well that then once I've turned in the manuscript and done the revisions, and I can take a break, which usually entails doing research for the next book, but I love that. But I can be away from the characters and then just dive right back in when it's time to do the next draft. Okay. But my brain, you know, I need to stay focused, or I will get, you know, distracted.
Yeah, stay disciplined.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. During the actual writing, you know, I don't want to take any time off at all. And, you know, towards the end of the book, you just get this complete tunnel vision. You know, even if somebody invited you to go and do something lovely, you know, you'd be, no, I don't want to do that. I've got it, you know, because all you can think about is getting to the end, getting it finished. So during that real intensive phase of writing, every day until the job is done. But then between books, I think it's healthy to have a break, because, you know, a good way of thinking about it is that you know, it's like you're filling the tank with the material really for the next book. And you need to be doing that without thinking specifically about it, because it doesn't work if you go out and say, I am going to go and hunt for material for my next book. That doesn't work. You have to be doing random things, coming across random stories or seeing random things happen in order for the ideas to start building up. You know, because when you're writing, that's like, you know, you're opening the faucet, but if there's nothing in the tank, doesn't matter if you open the faucet because nothing comes out. So you need that break where you are doing other things in order for you know, your reservoir of ideas and material to refill itself. So, you know, that's where the vacations come in handy.
Yeah, and you just never know where you're going, where that next idea comes from. I remember I one time was randomly read this obituary in the New York Times that was about a woman named Huguette Clark, who was the youngest daughter of a copper baron who died maybe in the last 10 years. I can't remember when exactly this was, but what struck me about, so she had inherited like $300 million. She had a giant apartment on Fifth Avenue, you know, one of these old school, huge apartments. She had a mansion in Connecticut and an estate in California on the coast. But she spent the last 20 years of her life choosing to live in a hospital in New York. She wasn't sick. She just liked living in the hospital, I guess. And she died in the hospital. But that entire time, she had kept all three of her residences fully staffed. There were fresh flowers, all of these things. The staff always had everything ready in case she might turn up, but of course she never did. And I remember I read that and I just thought, what is the story there? Like, why? What brings some? I just was fascinated. Like, why, if you have all this money and you have these amazing homes, do you choose to live in a hospital in this little confined room? And so I just bookmarked that obituary and I saved it. And then years later, when I remembered it, and I actually based a character in my book, The Counterfeit Heiress, on Huguette Clark. So you just never know when you're taking time off what you're going to uncover.
I can't wait to read that book now. I love that. Okay, before we say goodbye, we need to know what your next books are. The Megan is reminding me of that, and that's important. And Tasha, I'm pretty sure I'm right. It's The Secrets of the Nile, right? For you,
That is right. That is right. Emily and Colin are having a not very relaxing trip to Egypt.
Can imagine how that's going to look. And how about you, Andrew? What do you have coming up next?
Well, my next one, it's another one written with my brother. My next one is another one written with my brother. So it's going to be Reacher number 26, and it's called Better Off Dead, and it comes out in October. I think it's the 26th, something like that.
Okay.
So that is that's the next one for us.
Okay, we will be looking for both of those. We are just so grateful and so lucky to have had you tonight. I don't think we will ever be lucky enough to have such a charming and amazing couple who are both such amazing writers. Very lucky to have you. Thank you so much. We really have enjoyed it.
We're delighted to be here.
Thank you.
We're delighted. And I hope that someday we can come to the library in person.
Boy, would we love that. You're welcome anytime. Thank you again. And let me thank
we would love to.
Thank you, Andrew. Wishing you guys all the best. And I want to thank our audience too for being here, for adding to the conversation, for your support, and for being part of our family. Remember, this is going to be posted on CLPL YouTube channel in a couple days. So look for it if you want to watch it again. Give us a call at the library if we can help with anything, or contact us on clpl.org in our chat feature. And now this is the hardest part for me, because if we were together in our meeting room, I'd be able to, maybe hug you and say goodnight and hug everybody. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off the lights, say thank you again, close the door, and wish everybody a great night. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tasha and Andy. Bye-bye.